Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. Millions of people across the southeastern part of the United States are recovering from the devastating effects of Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene. Within this environment, there is a lot of bad advice and also scams. In fact, the IRS on Tuesday issued a warning to taxpayers against scams that are targeting people who are seeking charitable help. Joining us now to talk about legitimate forms of help and also tax policy is Kelly Phillips Erb. She's a tax attorney and a senior writer for Forbes on tax and financial crime. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been writing about the legitimate forms of help in the aftermath of these hurricanes and the illegitimate forms of help. Rather, let's call them what they are, scams. Let's break it down. What are these scams? What should people be on the lookout for as they recover from these two very large storms?
Well, there's a lot of different variations on scams that I think people need to be watching for, both as taxpayers who were not impacted by the storms and by those who were impacted. So I'll do the latter first, people who were impacted. A lot of these, we're going to call them scams. Some of them aren't so much scams as it's just really bad information that's floating around. So you'll see on TikTok, on social media, telling people how they can file claims. And these may be people who don't have much experience in that regard, telling people where to look for help. And they may not be legitimate charities. They may not be legitimate sites. Purporting to offer help filling out FEMA forms, but charging a fee to do so. These are ways where people are being impacted when there is legitimate help available. On the other side of the coin, people like viewers who want to help are also finding out that there are scams where people are saying that they're soliciting money to be used towards charitable relief efforts, when in fact those charities may be new, the money may be going to administrative costs, or it may just be that the entire thing is a scam and not $1 of that money is going to relief efforts. So it's really important to start looking for legitimate sources when you're looking for information and not necessarily rely on a meme or a TikTok video, even if it has millions of views.
So what are the best legitimate sources for relief? And let's start with the folks who are impacted. If you are in North Carolina, any of the Carolinas, or Georgia or Florida, where should you go?
So FEMA has a great website. I know FEMA's been getting a lot of, negative attention lately for how it was handling the storm. But I think most politicians and folks in the area will tell you that FEMA is on the ground and is working to offer relief to taxpayers and those who are impacted by the storms. If you go to the FEMA site, it will tell you not only how to get that $750 payment that people have been talking about, which is actually meant to be a payment for immediate relief. It is not the total that you can receive under FEMA. It's actually much more than that, but also shows you how to file claims. So one place I would go 100% is to the government websites like FEMA and also IRS. IRS has been offering some relief in terms of extending tax deadlines. They also have a hotline set up to help people who have questions. IRS.gov, not any of the variations. If it says .com behind it, don't go there directly. Go to IRS.gov, go to FEMA.gov. There are also a lot of legitimate organizations where people are volunteering their time to help people who are impacted by the storm. In all of the states that you mentioned, there are legal aid services that are available for free to people who are impacted by the storms. Sometimes it's phone calls, so there are toll-free hotlines where they can just give you advice and direct you to resources. Other times it may be that you actually need representation, and there are attorneys who can sign up to help for free. All of the states have a legal aid website. You Google the name of the state and then just do legal aid. It should get you there. It's also available on Forbes.com. And I would also mention that for attorneys who are interested in helping, states like North Carolina, for example, where the damage was fairly extensive, the North Carolina Supreme Court recently invoked what's called the Katrina Order, based on Hurricane Katrina, where attorneys who are not licensed in the state of North Carolina can volunteer under the umbrella of the North Carolina Legal Aid Services to offer help and expertise. So there's lots of help that's available. It is free. There's charities, as you know, that are offering services. World Central Kitchen is offering meals. Salvation Army and Red Cross are both offering not only meals, but also reunification services, because there are still people missing. Dozens of people in North Carolina have not yet been located. So there's a lot of information available. I would encourage people to, I always say, I know that folks like to support new things sometimes, but a lot of the organizations that have been around for a really long time are used to being on the ground, and they have the infrastructure to be able to help. So I would seek those out.
I was just about to ask, what are the most legitimate forms of charitable aid for those of us who want to donate and don't know where to go?
So I would say, again, kind of the oldies but goodies rule, right? Like a lot of the established organizations, new organizations may actually be able to provide support, but make sure they are actually 501c3 organizations. If in fact you want a deduction for your donation, you can find out if those are legitimate by going to the IRS website, and they have a tax exempt search engine tool. So you can just Google, put your the name of the organization in, and it'll tell you if it's tax exempt or not. And I would mention that most of those organizations, the legitimate ones, especially those that have been around for a while, if you go to their website, you'll also see their 501c3 information, sometimes with their tax exempt documentation. Sometimes they'll actually put their tax exempt letter from the IRS right up on the website so that you can verify it for yourself.
If someone suspects they have fallen prey to a scam, either as someone making a charitable donation or intending to make a charitable donation, or someone impacted by this storm, what should they do?
So there's a few things to consider. The first thing that I would say is you want to mitigate your own damage, right? Like, as much as you may want to make sure that everybody else stays away from those organizations, you want to help yourself first. So if you've fallen prey to one of those scams, there are a few things you can do. If you've made a credit card donation, for example, you could contact your credit card company and have that reversed. Same thing with your bank. You may also want to freeze your credit. Because a lot of the scams, the whole point of them isn't just to take your money, is to take your contact information so that they can use it for filing a bogus tax return in your name, opening a credit card in your name. So if you think that you've been scammed, while you might not be able to get your money back, hopefully you can if it's through like a credit card or a bank where the transaction can be reversed. But if you can't get your money back, at least make sure you protected your personal information. And again, that could be freezing your credit, notifying your bank that this has happened. And then IRS has a website, page on its website dedicated to identity theft. If you're concerned that someone has your information, you can also let the IRS know so that they can monitor your tax account so that no one files a tax return on your behalf. On the other side of wanting to make sure this doesn't happen to somebody else, you can notify the state attorney general. State's attorney general in particular, you can just again Google to find the name of the contact information for the attorney general in your state. They will follow up and investigate. You can also report it to the FBI, and there are a number of other government agencies that really do want to help. IRS criminal investigations, for example, that really do want to help make sure that nobody else gets ensnared in these kinds of schemes.
As we talk about relief and recovery, you are a tax attorney, so I want to ask, and I'll tell you why I'm asking. I was texting with a friend who's in Tampa, and she said, I'm going to easily hit my hurricane deductible this year and possibly spend even more than that. Is paying for damage and recovery from a hurricane tax deductible, Kelly?
So that's a tricky question, and here's why. We do have something in the tax code called a casualty loss, which does allow you to take a deduction on your taxes for all kinds of damage. So tree falls through your roof, all kinds of different things that happen, and the cost of getting you back to where you were before. Not counting any insurance claims, obviously, because you can't double dip, right? So if the insurance company pays you, you can't get the deduction. That being said, under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the ability to deduct casualty losses was changed dramatically. So you have to be in a federally declared disaster area to claim the casualty loss deduction on your tax return now. And the way you can find that out is you can go to FEMA.gov, and it will list all of the counties or cities. I think in Virginia, they actually have one city named that wasn't a whole county. But you can figure out by location whether or not you're entitled to that relief. If you ask me this question in a year and a half, I might say there's a different answer, because once the provisions under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act change, which they may, if they sunset at the end of 2025, that might be different. But at least for this year, you can get relief, but only if you're in a federal disaster area. And I would say that that's not just limited to people who live there. It also extends to people who work there.
So we've talked about legitimate forms of help through charitable aid. We've talked about the tax policy. What other forms of relief have you been covering, or that readers have been asking you about?
Well, one thing I think that folks need to know, is particularly important this week because we had a filing deadline of October 15 for tax returns. Records may be underwater, your tax preparer may be closed. You may not be able to have internet access to e-file, so a lot of folks are really concerned about filing their 2023 returns on time. Those have been extended for the same areas that we were talking about before. Again, you can find the actual places listed on IRS.gov, as well as in my article on Forbes. But the IRS has extended those deadlines through May of next year. That also includes your 2024 returns, which would have been due on April 15th of 2025. As you mentioned at the top of the program, it looks like recovery is going to be really slow. So IRS is sort of taking a long view of this rather than rolling out deadline extensions. They've already extended it past our normal due date all the way to May 1st. So there's lots of relief available in that regard. Also, folks who may be subject to other deadlines, including business tax returns, those have also been extended through to May 1st. Some payroll deposits for business owners. And then two other things of note. Around tax time, you also have to file, if you have foreign assets, you file something called an FBAR. FBARs were also due with your normal tax returns generally, but Treasury has extended that until May 1st to kind of align with the IRS deadline. But however, I should mention, because this is a question that's come up a lot, FinCEN is also in charge of the new Corporate Transparency Act. Some people may have heard it as the BOI requirements, which are beneficial owner requirements that require small businesses to make a report. This is the first year we've had the program and the filing requirements. And for a lot of taxpayers, millions of taxpayers, small businesses in particular, that deadline is the end of the year. That has not been extended. There have been a lot of trade organizations, taxpayer organizations that have called on FinCEN to extend that, and we haven't heard yet, but that's something I would definitely keep an eye out, especially if you are a small business.
Those are really important deadlines, and you've been covering it on Forbes.com. So anyone who's just watching, this is all written down under Kelly's byline on Forbes.com. So be sure to check that out. And Kelly, before we let you go, I want to ask, because we've been interviewing meteorologists here who say that these storms have been intensifying. They've just been getting worse year after year as the ocean temperatures rise and create the conditions for high winds, a tremendous amount of rainfall, and the damage we're seeing. So I want to ask, based on what you understand about the tax policy and how it might change, at least in regards to tax, are we prepared for worsening storms, or do policies need to change to better facilitate financial recovery after so much damage?
I think that's an excellent question for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is when you look at the scope of the extensions that I've mentioned. Interestingly, for filing for IRS, so I'm thinking directly right now just about filing requirements, not even the casualty loss deduction that we talked about. When you look at that, you see that the Hurricane Helene in particular, when they rolled those deadlines forward, they included deadlines that they had already extended for Hurricane Debbie, because that came earlier in the year. So we're already seeing those. Some other places in the mid-Atlantic states had already been impacted by storms, and we're also seeing them out west, specifically wildfires. This is another area where IRS has had to continually call for extensions. I do think as these kinds of things intensify that there's going to be a call for a better system, a faster system. I will say in IRS's defense, they were really quick to get the extensions out this year. But if you're a taxpayer and you see a tax deadline, especially small business owners who have multiple deadlines because they have payroll deposits and all of those kinds of things that they constantly have to prepare for, it can be really stressful in an already stressful situation. So I do think that IRS is going to have to figure out, it would be Congress, but is going to be responding to IRS's call to make that easier. I also think, and I've seen proposed legislation, I don't know if it's hit the floor yet, but there was some suggestion that there should be some changes to the way that we're doing these casualty loss deductions. Again, for years and years and years, you used to be able to claim them no matter where you are. For taxpayers to have to go to a website to see whether or not they're eligible for relief. Again, in these situations, you can imagine that that's quite stressful. So I think there are going to be calls for strengthening those deductions, or maybe even broadening those deductions, because they're also quite limited depending on whether you had a business or whether you're just a homeowner, and it can be complicated. So, in an ideal world, we'd see a more simple system and a more efficient and a wide-reaching system. We haven't gotten there yet. I would be shocked to not hear a lot of that clamor in 2025 as they revisit the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Kelly Phillips Erb, senior writer covering tax, financial crimes, and of course a tax attorney. Thank you so much for joining us to share your insight. We so appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.